My name is Veronica Alden. I'm 32 years old, a marketing specialist who has built her career on reading subtle cues body language in boardrooms, the shift of a client's tone before objections land. That skill never failed me at work. I didn't expect it would be the only thing keeping me steady at my own family's dinner table. The old house in Savannah creaked as I stepped inside, Spanish moss swaying against the windows. My dad, Trevor, greeted me with a curt nod instead of his usual warm slap on the back. My mother bustled around the kitchen, humming too loudly, and my sister Sabrina scrolled her phone on the couch, her diamond-studded watch catching the chandelier light. The smell of lasagna filled the dining room, but the air was tight, rehearsed, as if everyone had memorized lines from a script I hadn't been given. I set my bag down and walked toward the table. That's when I saw them. On the sideboard near the silverware lay a stack of legal documents. Trevor stood close to Sabrina, his brow furrowed in concentration while she bent over the papers. My heart lurched as my eyes caught the ink. My name, written in a hand that was mine but not mine, the strokes clumsy, too rounded, the tail of the A curling wrong, a forged signature, bold as daylight. For a breath, I froze, the room humming around me. Sabrina smirked like a child caught doodling, then quickly shifted to cover the page. Dad cleared his throat, too casually, shuffling the papers aside. They thought I hadn't noticed. I lifted my glass of water, keeping my hands from shaking, and smiled. Years of negotiation taught me the power of silence. They believed they were steps ahead, but none of them knew the truth that the accounts they were so desperate to access held exactly $1 and a red alert trigger. The moment they tried to touch it, alarms would flare where they least expected. I sat down at the table, resting my napkin on my lap, the mask of a dutiful daughter in place. The trap was already set. Outside, the Savannah dusk settled, cicadas buzzing through the open windows, and I thought of the woman whose wisdom had prepared me for this moment. The clink of silverware in Savannah that night stirred a memory so vivid it almost pulled me out of the room. I was 9 again, sitting across from Grandma Pamela at her favorite diner on Broughton Street. The red vinyl booths squeaked when I shifted, and the smell of oregano and melted cheese wrapped around us like comfort. She'd order a large pizza, thin crust, always the same. When it arrived, she'd slide it closer and cut it into uneven slices with her own knife, ignoring the waiter's neat triangles. "This one's for rent and groceries," she'd say, setting aside the biggest wedge. "This one's for the future savings." Another slice landed on the napkin between us. "This smaller one is for giving, for helping someone else." She tapped the tiniest piece with a grin. "And this little sliver is for fun. Spend it on something that makes you smile, so you don't resent the rest." At 12, I started my own ledger in a spiral notebook, tracking the quarters I earned mowing lawns or folding laundry for neighbors. Pamela would look it over during our Saturday breakfasts, nodding at the tidy columns, asking gentle questions that made me think harder about what I wanted long-term. By 16, I was babysitting nearly every weekend in our cul-de-sac, and I used the cash to open my first investment account. Pamela came with me to the bank, her hand steady on my shoulder as I signed the forms. Sabrina never saw the point. 3 years older, she burned through her allowance on clothes or gadgets before the week was out, when she needed more. Our parents slipped her 20s, shaking their heads with a smile as if indulgence were affection. If she wrecked a neighbor's fence with her skateboard, Mom and Dad covered it if she forgot to save for a school trip. They paid, Pamela noticed, one afternoon, after Sabrina had breezed in bragging about new shoes she hadn't paid for. Grandma leaned close and spoke low. "Don't let their habits convince you you're wrong. Caution isn't stinginess. Veronica, it's strength. Remember that." I did remember. Every neat entry in my ledger carried her voice beside it, steadying me when the house felt tilted. By the time I was 14, my spiral notebook ledger had thickened with pages of numbers. I'd saved every dollar from babysitting, mowing lawns, even scrubbing windows for our neighbors on Gaston Street. All of it was leading to one goal, a simple laptop for schoolwork. I kept the cash tucked inside a blue ceramic jar in my closet, the lid sealed with tape, the total written in neat ink on the bottom of each page. One Friday afternoon. I came home from school humming, ready to count the bills one more time before heading to the store the next day. When I lifted the jar, it felt lighter. My hands shook as I peeled off the tape and opened it. More than half the money was gone. Downstairs, Sabrina lounged on the sofa, her skateboard propped by the door. She was laughing with Mom, who was explaining to Dad about the Johnson's mailbox shattered when Sabrina had flown down the hill showing off for friends. "We'll pay them back," Mom said breezily. "It was just an accident," I blurted out. "Where's my money?" Dad barely looked up. "We'll replace it soon." "Veronica? Family helps family." Sabrina smirked, tossing her hair. "Relax. You'll make more. You always do." The humiliation burned hotter than the loss itself. My hours of sweat in Savannah's sticky heat. The blisters from raking leaves all erased in a shrug and a promise that never came true. I clenched my fists, but said nothing. In that house, protest was treated like selfishness. That weekend, Pamela found me sulking on her porch swing. She handed me a glass of sweet tea and waited until I spoke. My voice cracked when I told her what had happened. She didn't look surprised. She just sighed, eyes steady on mine. "Boundaries protect your foundation," she said softly. "If you don't guard what you've built, others will take without shame. And once you let them, they'll never stop." Her words sank deeper than any loss of cash. That was the day I realized my parents' fairness wasn't coming. If I wanted stability, I'd have to defend it myself. The seed was planted, small and sharp, growing with each passing year. By the time Sabrina graduated high school, her transcript was speckled with C's and late reports, but that didn't stop my parents from celebrating her acceptance to an expensive private college in Atlanta. They gushed about the campus, the prestige, the doors it would open. Checks were written without hesitation, tuition wired as if money grew on the azaleas outside our Savannah porch. I remember standing in the kitchen when Mom announced it, her face glowing. This is her chance. Veronica. She just needs the right environment. I thought about the jar that had once held my laptop fund. Sabrina hugged our parents, squealing about dorm decor. While I kept quiet, I knew the unspoken truth no matter her grades. She would be cushioned. I stayed in Savannah, enrolling at a state school I could afford with a partial scholarship. My days blurred between lectures and long shifts at a clothing store downtown, folding denim until my fingers ached. At night, I interned for a small marketing firm, writing copy for local campaigns, learning to analyze ad performance. I was exhausted, but I felt the thrill of building something that was mine. Meanwhile, Sabrina's updates came in bursts. One semester she was majoring in communications, the next in event planning. Photos surfaced on her social media trips to Miami, pool parties, champagne flutes clinking under string lights. When she flunked courses, our parents simply paid for summer classes. Brushing off concerns with, she's just finding herself. After college, she drifted from job to job, retail one month, sales the next, quitting each with stories about unfair bosses. Yet she always reappeared with new handbags, glittering jewelry, and rented luxury cars. I pieced together how loans co-signed by Dad, credit cards covered by Mom. When I earned my first real promotion at the firm, becoming a marketing coordinator, I drove home to share the news. Mom smiled politely, Dad nodded distractedly, and then both turned to Sabrina, who was describing her next big idea, a lifestyle blog she insisted would go viral. "She's got such potential," Dad said warmly, pride heavy in his voice. I stood there, holding the weight of my own steady climb, invisible in the shadow of her endless potential. That night, lying awake in my small apartment, I realized the divide between us wasn't temporary. We were on two roads that would never meet again. The call came on a heavy August afternoon, when the Savannah air felt too thick to breathe, Pamela's doctor spoke the words in clipped syllables: stage 4, metastasized, limited options. My knees gave way as if the floorboards themselves had turned to water. From that day, my life rearranged itself around her illness. I scaled back projects at the firm, shifting deadlines and bowing out of client pitches so I could drive her to treatments. The sterile halls of the oncology wing became a second home, the beep of monitors, the antiseptic tang in the air, Pamela's hand cool in mine as she forced a smile to keep me from falling apart. Sabrina came twice in 6 months. The first visit she breezed into the apartment with takeout from a trendy Atlanta spot, speaking more about her commute than Pamela's condition. Halfway through the meal, she pulled out a sleek folder and launched into a pitch about a subscription box for luxury cosmetics. She asked Pamela for a small investment to get it off the ground. Pamela's eyes, dulled from nausea, flicked to me. She shook her head gently and said, "Not this time." The second visit wasn't much different, some chatter about networking events, another hint for money, and then a quick exit. I stopped expecting more. It was during a quiet afternoon, sunlight filtering through the lace curtains, when Pamela called me close. Her voice was rough but steady. "Veronica, we need to prepare. Call Mr. Sutton." He was an attorney Pamela trusted, a man with kind eyes and a reputation for thoroughness. Together with Aunt Cheryl, Pamela's younger sister, pragmatic and exacting, they set to work drafting an irrevocable trust. Over the following weeks, notaries came by with stamps and forms. Pamela's doctor signed an affidavit attesting to her mental clarity, ensuring no one could later claim she was confused. The trust was airtight. Savings accounts, investment portfolios, even the deed to her modest townhouse all transferred out of reach before her decline could invite contest. Aunt Cheryl's presence ensured every signature was witnessed, every detail sealed against dispute. Late one evening, after the last document was signed and filed, Pamela beckoned me closer. Her breath was shallow, but her words cut clean. "This is to protect you from them." Tears stung my eyes as I held her frail hand, knowing she was giving me more than money. She was giving me a shield against a storm she knew would come. The weight of that shield settled on my shoulders long before she was gone. 3 weeks after Pamela's funeral, my phone buzzed with a message from Dad. "Family dinner, Friday at 6. Important financial discussion." The formality in his words made my stomach twist. Our family didn't schedule dinners with agendas. They happened in bursts, barbecues in the backyard, casseroles on weeknights. This was different. Friday evening. The Savannah dusk was heavy with humidity as I pulled into the driveway. Sabrina's luxury SUV gleamed under the oaks, rims polished like mirrors. I parked my modest sedan beside it, an echo of the 2 lives we had grown into. Inside, the familiar scent of Mom's lasagna hit me. She stood at the stove, fussing with a platter of cheeses I'd never seen at our table before. Dad greeted me with a stiff nod, his shirt collar too tight, his expression tighter. Sabrina lounged in the living room, scrolling on her phone, a designer bracelet catching the light each time she shifted her wrist. We sat for small talk, the kind that slides off the surface without touching anything real. As I carried drinks from the kitchen, my eyes caught on a stack of papers half covered by a napkin on the sideboard. Legal forms, my name scrawled across them in a clumsy hand, the same false curve on the A as before. My pulse quickened, but I set the glasses down calmly, as though I hadn't seen. Later, while conversation hummed around the dining table, I excused myself. Instead of turning down the hall to the bathroom, I slipped quietly into Dad's study. The air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. On his desk lay a folder labeled Sabrina's Finances in his tidy handwriting. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were records, loan statements, overdue notices, and transfers showing more than $100,000 in bailouts across the last 5 years. Tucked between the pages was a printed email from Scott, Sabrina's ex-boyfriend. He had written months earlier, warning my parents about her chronic overspending, pleading with them to intervene before she destroyed herself. They had ignored him. I snapped photo after photo with my phone. Each click a layer of armor sliding into place. Footsteps echoed down the hall. I slid the folder shut and turned toward the bookshelf, pretending to study old family photos. Mom's voice came from the doorway, tight and suspicious. "What are you doing in here?" I forced a smile. "Just remembering Pamela." Her eyes narrowed, but she said nothing as she led me back to the table, where the lasagna was cooling untouched. By the time we sat down to dinner, the lasagna had grown lukewarm. Dad folded his napkin with careful precision, his voice adopting a tone I had only heard in business meetings. "We've been thinking about Pamela's estate," he began, glancing at Mom, who nodded quickly. "Your sister's in a difficult spot financially, and since you're stable, it makes sense to redirect some of the inheritance her way." The words fell heavy. Less request than decree. I kept my fork steady, the habit of restraint guiding me. "How much are we talking about?" Sabrina shifted in her chair, eyes fixed on her plate. Dad didn't hesitate. $250,000. It will clear her debts and give her a fresh start. I let the silence stretch before leaning forward. "Debts from what?" "Exactly. Failed ventures, credit cards, luxury condos." Sabrina's head snapped up, her face flushed. "That's none of your business." Mom jumped in, voice trembling but insistent. "The market's been unkind to creative work. She just needs a chance." I tilted my head, the corners of my mouth calm. Funny. Scott said something different. He mentioned vacations, designer bags, new cars. Sabrina's fork clattered against her plate. "You've been talking to him. He's bitter. He doesn't know anything," before I could respond. My phone buzzed on the table. A red notification flashed across the screen. Unauthorized access attempt detected. Mr. Sutton's safeguard had tripped. I turned the phone so everyone could see the warning, its glow harsh against the dim dining room. "Banks take forgery seriously," I said evenly. "This alert means the system flagged an attempted breach. If it continues, authorities will be notified." Panic rippled instantly. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. "Turn it off." "Veronica, we can fix this quietly." Sabrina lunged across the table, fingers grasping for my phone. I pulled it back smoothly, not raising my voice. Dad's face hardened. "This is family. Family supports each other. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." I met his eyes, steady as stone. "Pamela created an irrevocable trust months before she passed. Everything you're reaching for is locked, untouchable. You knew her. Did you really think she wouldn't see this coming?" The silence that followed was jagged, cut through only by Sabrina's ragged breath and the faint tick of the clock on the wall. The weeks after that dinner spiraled into legal filings and cold envelopes stamped with court seals. My parents and Sabrina had wasted no time hiring a probate attorney, insisting Pamela's trust was built under undue influence, that her mind had been clouded by illness when she signed. I read their accusations with a strange detachment, like they were describing strangers instead of blood. Mr. Sutton, calm as ever, built our defense piece by piece. He gathered the notary's journal with Pamela's signature clear and dated, the affidavit from her physician affirming her mental clarity, the transfer records stamped weeks before her decline. Aunt Cheryl submitted her statement as witness, describing Pamela's composure that day, her steady voice as she directed each clause. Every page felt like a stone placed carefully in the foundation. The hearing itself was brief. The courtroom in downtown Savannah was nearly empty, the scent of old wood and dust lingering under the hum of ceiling fans. The judge skimmed through the documents, asked a few clipped questions, and then delivered the decision in less than 20 minutes. The trust stood firm, their claims dissolved, dismissed under Georgia probate law with no room for appeal. From there, everything collapsed quickly. Creditors closed in on Sabrina, repossessing her imported car in the middle of a parking lot, leaving her screaming at the tow truck driver. The lease on her luxury condo was terminated within weeks. Eviction notice taped to the glass door she once flaunted on social media. For my parents, the weight came heavier. Years of co-signed loans and hidden debts unraveled in Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Their once prized Savannah house, the one where azaleas bloomed each spring and where Pamela's laughter had once filled the porch, went to auction. I drove past one morning and saw strangers walking the yard, assessing it like a commodity. Each loss tightened the silence between us, a silence that felt less like mourning and more like inevitability. Their world contracted as mine, finally, began to open after the court's dismissal. The messages began almost immediately. Voicemails heavy with guilt. Your sister is devastated. Your father's health is suffering. I listened once, then deleted. Soon the numbers multiplied, blocked, changed, and blocked again. I told Mr. Sutton to handle anything necessary. He filtered the rest. For the first time in my life, silence became protection, not punishment. Still, the silence carried weight. In therapy, I learned how to sit with it. Dr. Marsh's office overlooked Forsyth Park, its windows catching the shade of moss-draped oaks. Week after week, we unpacked years of imbalanced resentment I had buried, the gnawing guilt of walking away, and the strange relief of boundaries holding firm. No contact isn't cruelty, Dr. Marsh reminded me gently. It's clarity. It's choosing peace, with space carved out. I began to think about what Pamela had truly left me. Not just the trust, but the lessons she etched into every Saturday morning at the diner. Security, foresight, generosity with limits. I wanted others to feel the steadiness she gave me, so I started small, a workshop at a Savannah community center, folding chairs in a drafty hall, a whiteboard borrowed from a local teacher. I called it the Pamela Financial Literacy Foundation. The name felt like a promise. Young adults showed up with notebooks and questions about credit, about saving when family pulled at them, about how to say no without drowning in guilt. I taught them the pizza method, drawing uneven slices on the board just as she had on the table so many years ago. The foundation grew quickly partnerships with schools, online webinars, volunteers who believed in the mission. Each session felt like a brick laid in something steadier than money. It was legacy built not in secrecy, but in community. One evening, after a class ended, I cut a pizza for the group to share. I divided it the way Pamela once had a large slice for essentials. One for the future, one for giving, a sliver for joy. Before I passed out the plates, I left a single slice untouched at the center of the table. Beside it sat a small framed photo of Pamela, her smile quiet but fierce. The students laughed, reaching for their pieces. I looked at the slice left behind and felt the room steady around me. It wasn't loss anymore. It was continuity.